All right, everyone, welcome to this week's live Q&A. Welcome. Live! Hey, everyone, it's Friedemann Findeisen from Songwriting. How are you folks doing? So, last week was pretty intense. A lot of people have been were asking on the live chat last week about Patreon and whether I would ever consider doing something like that, because crazy enough, people really would like to support me, which was something that really, I mean, it's obviously very flattering, and it really made me think, because this is the second or third time this has happened on this live Q&A, that people were really adamant about wanting to send me money. And, you know, I'm not totally comfortable just taking money. I want to give you something for that as well. So I've been really doing some big thinking last week about how I could give you something in return for that. And so I've come up with a couple of things. First of all, Patreon is going to happen, and sooner rather than later. I'm actually almost done with the page. I just need some few more tweaks to take care of. But there's going to be two things on this Patreon. The first thing is we're moving this live Q&A to Patreon only. And so it's going to be gated content from now on, which is a shame on one hand because it means I won't be doing this for free anymore. But at the same time, I'm seeing a lot of people come back every single week. And so I'm like, well, you know, I think it's fair. Like if you're getting something out of it, to pay a few bucks every month to get these live Q&As, I think is a pretty fair deal, because it's an hour of my time and you really get an answer for every single question you ask. So far, there haven't been any episodes where I wasn't able to really answer every single question. So I think that's fair. So that's going to be one half of it. And the other half of it is going to be that I'm going to be doing more song feedback. So this is going to replace the official song feedback on my website, where you could send in a song previously and I would send you a video back with my review of it. And so what I'm going to move this whole model to is that you will be able, through the platform, to send me songs and I will review them for you. Now, this is a higher tier than the live Q&A one, so this is going to cost you a little bit more, but it's still going to be super cheap compared to what you were paying beforehand, which was $70 per song. So compared to that, it's going to be super, super cheap, and this is all going to be exclusive to Patreon. So that's how I'm handling it at the moment. We'll see how that works, and I'm totally open for doing even more stuff for my patrons once I have a little bit of a following there. Obviously, in the beginning, it doesn't make sense to do a lot of exclusive content there, and these live Q&As I can do. That's totally fine. But if we ever reach a certain, like, there's these goals that you can do in Patreon. Once we reach a couple of the higher goals, then I'm totally ready to do something like 2 live Q&As every week or something like that, or doing additional videos that are just exclusive for you guys, or maybe having like one big video that's just exclusive every week for you guys or something like that. So there's a lot of possibility here, a lot of opportunity, and so I'm really excited how that's going to go, and you can expect the Patreon account to roll around sometime this week. Secondly, sorry, one more update before we get into the questions, guys. We're going to get there eventually. But I'm still waiting for the chat to fill up a little bit more. So 4 people is not quite enough to get a real conversation going, is it? So we're going to wait a little bit longer, not to put any one of you down. And by the way, hey Moreno, hey White, and RCCT 550, and Anderson the Fourth is also here. So how's it going? Oh, and Severance is also here now. People are starting to roll in. Here we go. Slowly, there we go. All right, cool. Now, the second thing I wanted to mention is for the music production workshop, the Geek Free Music Production, I just added an update, which is all about EQing. It's 2 more hours added to the base course, which I think was already 4 hours or something like that. So it's turning into a pretty long course. Like, there's a lot of stuff in that course. So yeah, if you're interested at all in next steps, because until now we're still kind of in the basics of how to use a sequencer, how to mix and produce your own music. but it's slowly growing into a full-born course that you can really learn how to produce from. So, all right, that was all. Let's move into the actual questions and let's see what's happening here. Moreno says, "Hello, sir. Of course they do. You are talented." Lol. Thanks very much, Moreno. That's why I did it, because so many people kept asking me about it, about starting a Patreon channel, and so I'm happy to oblige, because it also makes these live Q&As feel a little bit more rewarding, which they already do, because I love talking to you guys. It's great, and they're my favorite thing of the week, and every single week I'm looking forward to them. I really do. It just would be nice if it's like a two-way street a little bit more. I mean, I didn't really mind. I'm totally honest here. I really didn't mind it at all, which is why I did it for such a long time. And really, just because you guys said like, "Hey, can we give you a little bit of money?" Then I'm thinking like, okay, what could they give me money for? What's a thing that you would be maybe willing to pay a little bit of money for every single month? I'm like, well, the live Q&As I'm already doing. Why not just make that a gated kind of content? Still make it very cheap, and it's really not that expensive, but thanks. Anyways, I really, really, really appreciate it. So, White says, "I would like to know how to write a groovy song. So far, I've only written ballads." Well, again, it really all comes down to, when you're starting to write a song, is what is going to be the focus of your song, right? And that's typically what I start with. So, there's not just one correct way to write a song, obviously. If I'm writing a pop song, for example, I will often start with the vocals. I'll often want to start with a good melody or maybe a good lyric before I start anything else. If I'm writing, say, a dance track, I'm going to start with like an interesting synthesizer sound. If I'm starting with a jazz track, it's going to be all about harmony. And if I'm starting on an orchestral track, it's all going to be about a certain arrangement that I have in mind, a certain orchestration for the section that I'm writing on, and maybe chords as well. But, you know, it depends on what kind of orchestral music I'm writing. For groovy music, it just makes sense to start with the groove, right? And so the way I start writing a groovy music is by, I might write like a bass line or something like that, just to have a little bit of musical material, or maybe I'll play some chords first. But then the first thing I'm really going to work on heavy is going to be that groove, right? And so I'm pulling in samples, working with different samples, you know, they work with one another, moving them around to find just something that just sounds really groovy. And then I build my song on that. Now, so that is even before I've written a melody or lyric or chords or anything like that. You know, all of that is subject to change, but the first thing I really start working on is the groove, so that the whole song can revolve around that basic groove. And judging from what you hear in the charts a lot, that's what a lot of people do. I think a lot of modern pop songs emerge from an initial basic groove. And so the way I think it works is that producers, and I know this for myself as well, a lot of producers will just send you a finished track, and that is essentially, producers are really in love with groove, so a lot of the times you just get a finished beat, right? And then you're supposed to write melodies to that. And as a top-line writer, which is a really big profession in the music industry right now, we just write, and this is what I do as well a lot, is that we get beats and then we just write melodies to that, right? So the person that wrote the beat is really mostly taking care of the groove and thinking about those kind of things, and I'm writing the melody at a later stage, and I'm only thinking about the melody. And it's the marriage of those two things that I think is pop music, is the groove and the melody. And of course there's lyrical storytelling as well, but it's those three things that I think make a great song, or a commercial song at least. So that's really my tip. Start with the groove, start with that, and build the song around that. Anderson IV says, "Oh no, I wanted to send 3 songs August the 20th. Well, you still can. It's still totally possible through Patreon. And I don't think there's going to be that many people on becoming patrons right away. So I think your chances of having your song reviewed are very high to 100%. So I don't think it's going to fill up. Like, I'm not going to have 100 patrons in the first month. You know, if that happens, I really have to rethink how I'm going to do this whole model. But I think at first it's going to be like maybe, 10 or 15 or something. And not everyone's going to have a new song every single month. So I think that's going to work out just fine, I hope. But if it's going to be more than that, if it turns into the hundreds or 200s, then obviously I have to make some kind of decisions as to which songs to review. So that's going to get a little bit more difficult, but we'll see how that works in the future. That's a bridge that we'll cross when we come to it. Owen says, if songs have to follow the rule of 3 with tension, all the stuff you mentioned in the book, This is the addiction formula, by the way. How do you explain rap, which is easily the most popular genre of music now and rarely follows all the rules? That's a really good question. Rap music certainly has its own kind of rules, especially since its heritage is a different one. Pop music largely, or what we used to consider as pop music, standard band kind of songs, has its roots still in classic sonata form, and so we still have this 3-act kind of structure of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. But rap music really comes from using music as a sample and using that as a loop to rap over that. So it has a different kind of heritage, which means a lot of the rules that you read about in the addiction formula will not apply to hip-hop. That being said, there is a certain trend right now, and has been for maybe 5 to 7 years, that pop music, hip-hop music, is becoming more and more commercialized. And so certain tracks, like say a lot of Eminem's tracks, for example, use a very standard formula for these structures. So it still has a very clear chorus. Often, there was what's the one that he did with Ed Sheeran that has a very clear chorus, and sometimes there's even build up and stuff like that. It's way less than in normal pop songs, so to say. Because it really has its roots in having a loop and having a sample that she just keeps repeating, so you won't have that much tension and all that kind of stuff, but it's still there. And thinking about something like Look at Me Now, right, where the drums really have a great interplay with the vocal line. Like there's the rap that what's his name, Busta Rhymes does, like the "Let's go, 'cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away, but I know that I don't and I won't ever stop." That rap has a lot of interplay with the music as well. So there is a lot of tension, implied tension that's going on there. And implied tension is another big keyword here. A lot of tracks, thinking specifically of Drake here, use implied tension to their own good. So if you have a long stretch of beat that just keeps repeating, at least that beat has a certain implied tension. And, it's sometimes starts with just being as little as that the snare sounds really tinny and really small. Like it has no lows. It's just this kind of a snare. That is already a little bit of implied tension. Sometimes that's enough to carry a track and keep it interesting. On top of that, obviously, the groove of the performer needs to keep it interesting. So rhythm plays a major part here. And that is something I'm not completely comfortable discussing because I don't write rap that much that I could say that I've figured out the rules for it yet. But there's certainly something there. And when I write rap, I notice that it's difficult to kind of stay in the same flow throughout the entire song because it's going to get boring very quickly. So you kind of have to switch it up, and you have to find the right moments to do that switching up. I'm not sure if that would follow the rule of 3, but it's something to think about at least. So I haven't really given this much thought, but it's an interesting question. Thank you very much, Owen. And let's move on to the next question. Jordan says, Patreon is coming? Yes. Cool. Glad to hear that. You're digging that. Moreno says, in the holistic bonus package, there are 3 hit song arrangements. Could I use this format to replace the format from the 7-day hit challenge? Absolutely you could. Absolutely you could. Beatmaster says, as US3 said, the drum and bass are the most important instruments. It really depends on the genre. For a lot of pop music, it really is the vocals. But I think it's that interplay of vocals and groove that really makes a pop song commercial, I think. But yeah, drum and bass are obviously very important. Bass is also quite important. That I would say is probably the 3rd most important. So you have, I think for me the order would probably be for more dancey music. It's probably beat, vocals, and then bass. So in descending order. And for really commercial kind of singable chanson kind of pop music, it would probably be vocals, beat, and then bass. Or maybe even in that case, harmony and then bass. I'm not sure. And obviously, nothing is set in stone here. This is just something, that's just how it is in my head, like the order of things in my process if I write a piece of music like that. All right, White says, thanks a lot for your answer. Helped me a lot. Glad to hear it. Jordan says, I know having a finished sounding demo is critical to be competitive today, but do you have any insights about getting caught up in the production versus the songwriting? I keep getting stuck. So if you keep getting stuck with your production, I think what sometimes helps, especially if you're a more experienced producer as well, sometimes it helps to just get back to the instrument and just leave production out of it and start the production as soon as you're done writing that song on whatever your instrument is, right? So go back to just your instrument and just start writing some songs just on that. Make sure that the song is great, and then you just record it. Sometimes that can be enough. And then the production is just adding like the little bit of fairy dust on top of your already existing track. You know what I mean? So then all the work that you're going to be doing in the sequencer is just adding a bunch more things, like maybe a pad in the background or adding a nice reverb to your vocals or something like that. Right. Do you have any? Yeah, so that's one thing. Also, it really helps to understand how production works. The more you produce your own music, the more you're going to understand how it really can impact your songwriting as well, and how it can be a part of songwriting. So that's certainly something to consider, and that's something you unfortunately just get with practice or by buying my courses, of course. Yeah, so I would say just keep working on it, keep producing. Sometimes you have to force yourself through a couple of dry spells. That can totally happen. You know, it certainly happened to me. What other people might call a writer's block or something like that. Sometimes you just have to push through. Sometimes it's just a little bit of work. But yeah, if you keep getting stuck, unfortunately, you could always start a new project and keep coming back to it when you feel more comfortable with it again. But yeah, there we go. Michael says, afternoon, evening, any more thought to Feedback Friday? Yes, so that's going to be, I already mentioned it in the beginning of this video, I'm moving to Patreon here, so this live Q&A is going to move to Patreon, and it's going to be bi-weekly and every other week. So the weeks that I'm not doing the live Q&A, I'm going to do something like Feedback Friday. It's not going to be on a Friday, it's going to be on a Monday, but it's a live video where I'm going to talk about your songs, so people can send in songs through Patreon that I review live, basically. And Michael, I really loved your idea of saying, let's turn those into shorter videos, so one song per video, and maybe I'm just going to make a couple of live Q&As throughout the week. I'm not really quite sure how to do that yet. That's something I'm going to figure out this week, and really pick out one thing from those from that feedback and turn that into the title. I think that's a really smart idea, and I think it's going to help people understand what they can learn from every particular video. Because if you just see titles of songs in the titles of the videos, it's not going to really help you to understand what you can learn from that particular video. So I really love that tip. Thank you very much. That's definitely something I'm going to use somehow. Maybe I'm just going to put it in the description, but it's definitely going to get there somehow. Anderson says, I wanted the in-depth 45-minute analysis. Are you still doing that for Patreon? Yes, I think so. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how many people send in songs. But again, it's all about scale right now. If 5 people become patrons, then this is definitely going to be possible. Or, I mean, I can always shorten my analyses and really focus on what's important. And that doesn't mean that you're gonna miss out on certain pieces of feedback that you would have otherwise gotten. It just means that I'm gonna focus on the things that are really, really important in a short amount of time. And since you are a patron at this moment, you can just send in more songs and get your more detailed feedback that way. All right, Moreno says, this idea of genres of music having their own heritage, could you elaborate? That's kind of it, really. I mean, obviously, for all around the world, we all have different heritage, right? So European music has a different heritage than American music, has a different heritage than, South American music, or Spanish, or Indonesian music, or Latin American, Chinese, whatever music, right? Everyone has a different heritage, and that plays differently into how we conceive, write, and listen to music. So, for example, Eastern music is a lot more focused on pentatonic kind of scales, right? If you listen to Chinese music, a lot of times it's really just playing with the pentatonic scales, whereas here in the Western world, we really have unlocked sort of the church modes where, especially through jazz and modern classical, or even classical music, late classical music and modern classical music, we have gone really crazy in terms of what we accept as harmonious or nice sounding. And I mean, we've gone through the whole 12-tone thing in the 1920s. So there was like all of that being thrown at us and that's still in our heritage, even though none of that you will ever hear on the charts or something like that. 12-tone music certainly had a big impact on the Western world, and not even just 12-tone music. In all modern classical music, or all atonal music, has had a big impact. Culminating in jazz, obviously, in the 1960s or so. We had John Coltrane playing some really atonal stuff over some fairly well-known classics. So, as in the Western world, we have this huge background, and harmony plays a much bigger role, for example, than it does in, Africa, for example, where harmony really isn't a big deal. There it's all about groove, and just the perception of how people see groove there, how people see beats there, is completely different than what we grew up with here with classical music, where, for example, playing something tightly or adhering to a certain tempo was out of the question. Conductors kind of decide how fast they want to cue in things just so the music flows very naturally. It's more of a natural kind of thing. Whereas, in Africa, people would play together and there was no one to conduct them. So everyone just was playing at the same tempo. And groove, therefore, had a very different background there. And that's why eventually what happened, of course, was that these grooves from Africa would combine with our Western tradition, with harmony, essentially. And what comes out of it is really what we kind of hear in the charts today. And the same thing really happens with genres as well. Those are the big kind of sources, of course. But the same thing happens for each genre. Each genre has its own kind of history, and that really determines how to interpret, listen, and write in that genre. So, for example, even thinking of something like film music, right, which obviously started out as, I don't know if you know this is actually a really fascinating fact. Film music started out with black and white music. They would actually have a pianist playing in the theater, and they would have cue sheets. Basically, they would give you different cues. That's where we get the word from still in modern film composing. They would have a sheet for the movie that would have different cues, and it would refer to classical pieces. So it would say, like, here, play Beethoven's fifth bars 50 through 54, and then switch over to Mahler's fifth, whatever. I don't know, but it's like, because those 5 bars sound really happy and they fit that scene. And so these film composers, those film musicians that would play live to the screen, were typically just had a really massive database of classical pieces, and they would be able to quickly jump between those different pieces, and that was the job. And so that's where that came from. So it really came from classical music. That's why in the, say, 80s, 90s, 70s, even, we had like the big John Williams scores, and John Williams obviously was the biggest composer during that time period, and he really massively influenced how that genre, we listen to that genre today. And then in the 90s, Hans Zimmer kind of takes over. 2000 certainly is Hans Zimmer time, and electronic music comes into play. And that's because Hans Zimmer has a background as an engineer, as a sound designer, right? He has walls of synthesizers in his studios, and he really just loves tweaking with sounds, and that's his big deal. That's what he's really good at. And he started out as a pop musician, right? He wrote Radio Killed the Video Star. No, Video Killed the Radio Star, other way around. So he wrote that song, where he was one of the writers on it, and he had a pop band. So he brought all these pop music, electronic sensibilities into film music, and that kind of changed the course film music has taken since then. So understanding where a musical genre comes from is usually very conducive to being able to write in that genre. If you understand the roots of the genre, it really helps to write songs that the audience there is going to like. So that was a very long-winded answer, but long-winded, I think. But hopefully that gave you a little bit of an idea. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about here. I mean, there's definitely enough material to talk about this for hours and hours, but hopefully for now that's enough. Okay, Owen says, what are the best ways to make my chorus sound different from my verse? The best way is probably to add an instrument. that is still kind of what we see the most of, or to subtract an instrument. We see that more and more now. Taking stuff out for the chorus can be quite impactful as well, as long as there's some kind of arrangement change. So taking stuff in, putting stuff in, or taking stuff out, that's the first one. Increasing the vocal range, so either, you know, having a line that's just higher than what you had in the verse, or simply having a line that hits like that goes more. So if the verse, for example, was kind of like this, and the chorus goes like that, like has more hits, has a wider range, that already makes a big difference. That's definitely a big one. Those two I would really say are the biggest ones. Another really important one is for the melody, contrasting rhythms. So, for example, if in the verse you had a lot of short notes and a lot of short notes, then in the chorus you want to have a few longer notes. Or, you know, vice versa. If you have few long notes in the verse, then in the chorus you want to have a lot of short notes. It's another way to do it. Those, I think, are probably my favorites. Another way to do it would be to go, this is mostly for rock music, not so much for pop, which is more about danceability. But if you want impact, this also goes for electronic music, but mostly for rock music. Going from full time to halftime. So instead of going, you know, changing the time like that certainly has a big impact as well. And so typically going from full time to halftime, if you do it right, halftime can have this massive, huge, majestic kind of impact, or it can really relax the song. It depends on how you play it. For punk bands, for example, they often go from halftime to full time, or usually it's from full time to double time to add more excitement. So that's another way to do it, but that's certainly bound to certain genres. RCC2 550 says, is that how you pronounce it? How would you, like, is it ARCC2 CCT 550? How would you, or is it ARC 550? How would you pronounce it? Hey, I got two things. First off, what are your top niche bands for new ideas / inspiration? And two, did you ever considering opening up a Discord server for giving feedback, sharing ideas, etc.? First of all, I'm not actually sure what Discord is. Is that like, as far as I know, it's like isn't it like Skype or something like that? Could you elaborate on what Discord actually does that's different from a live Q&A like this? And secondly, I actually have a video on YouTube called My Top 50 Influential Artists or something like that. You just have to, you know, YouTube it. And in that video, I go through my 50 most influential artists. My top niche ones, I can already tell you, were Avishai Cohen, who's an Eastern European jazz double bass player. Fantastic music. Even if you're not into jazz, I promise you're at least going to enjoy it. You're at least going to find it interesting, that is. Super, super interesting. Ibrahim Malouf. By the way, all the names of these artists you can find in that video in the description. It has them, like, because I understand that some people might have problems with the spelling there. Ibrahim Malouf, which is also an Eastern European trumpet player, quarter-tone trumpet, which is interesting enough on its own. Super, super fascinating music, and my favorite thing about it is how he's skipping through different genres. That's something I generally love, and he does it so well. Like going from something that is just pure jazz to going like to salsa, and it's just, what just happened? This is just so insane. Or going to blues and then to rock and then to metal, and it's the weirdest thing, but it's all very consistent, and it just makes sense with this artist, and it has this world-embracing, beautiful kind of atmosphere going on in the background, and it works extremely well. So, and then for other genres, I really like Nothing Face for metal music. Bands like System of a Down have always been full of ideas for me, because they put so many ideas into one song that sometimes you can just take out one of their ideas and turn that into a whole song. Tool is another band like that just has a lot of interesting techniques that you can learn from. But those are kind of big bands. I'm thinking about more niche bands now. Element 80, certainly one of my favorite metal bands. Super interesting. Catatonia, fantastic band. I'm not sure if I actually included them in my top 50s list. If not, I really should have, because what's it called? The Great Big Lonely or something like that. They had an album that's something like that, or The Great Big Silence of Nothing. It's one of those, vague kind of titles, but it's a beautiful, beautiful album. I think I did. I included Soil's Song was one of the titles on my top 50s list. Super, super cool. What's her name? Baker. What's her name? Julie Baker? It's Julie Baker, right? Jesus. No, it's not Julie Baker. What's her name? Sprained ankle. Julianne Baker. That's her name. Julianne Baker. A folk artist that I really like. There's so many. Again, go to the list. That's really where you can find your answers. All right. Let's see. Falfish says, "Hey, Falfish." Moreno says, I had a Woody Guthrie, Lead Belly, Bob Dylan phase. What was important about that 145 era of music? What was important about that 145 era of music? 145, like those kind of chords, that's really something that stems from classical music, and I feel like there's two reasons for it, I think. First of all, is if your focus really is on the lyrics, then you're just going to grab the simplest chords that you possibly can, and those are, the tonic, subdominant, and dominant, so 145. Secondly, it's just those are the simplest sounding chords, and they just make the most sense harmonically if you think about them from a theoretical standpoint. So if you have any sort of classical training, those are often the first kind of chords that you look at. And so Woody Guthrie, for example, being a fantastic guitarist who obviously has a large knowledge in music, I think so, at least. I'm not sure, maybe he can't read music, but I would assume that he has a great knowledge in music theory. And so understanding how the different functions of these chords work probably is a big backbone of his writing. So yeah, that's what was important about that era. It's so the music is very simple in terms of the harmonic content. It's really, in terms of like Bob Dylan, it's really the lyrics. With Woody Guthrie, it's really the soloing, of course, and how he phrases those chords and what kind of voicings he uses and what kind of notes he plays in his solos to add, flavor to those chords. But yeah, it goes back to classical cadences. That's really what it comes down to. Whenever I see 145, that's the first thing I think of is 4-5-1 is that really classical, perfect cadence. So I think that if you're interested in that, that's what I would probably look into more. Jordan says, thank you. My cell phone keeps vibrating. Let me just turn that off real quick because that is quite annoying. There we go. All right. Jordan says, thank you, my deeper question. To what degree is genre determined by production? If I write a song on the piano, can production alone turn that into the skeleton of, say, a metal tune? So I've always said that if you want to write commercial songs, then essentially all songs kind of follow the same principles. So melody is always going to be good or not. Like you can write a great pop melody and it's going to work regardless of whether you're going to arrange it as a pop piece or rock piece or a folk piece, or the genre really doesn't matter. There are some limitations to that, and that is the more you go down into the niches. So rock certainly works. Metal, heavy metal, death metal, those kind of genres, the more you go down the niches, the more that kind of gets cloudier and cloudier, and those typical pop melodies might not work there as well, or they're not going to be a guarantee that the song works. But if you want to be commercial, there's certainly a type of melody that you can write that works in pretty much all genres. So the more commercial you want to be, the more it makes sense to study pop music, even if your primary genre is something completely different. Yes, the production, or how I would see it, the arrangement really has a huge impact on the song, obviously, and it's totally possible to take a Rihanna song and turn that into a metal song. And it's really all about, like, do you play guitars instead of synthesizers, and do you write a cool metal riff that goes well against her voice? It's all definitely very possible. So the genre is certainly determined by production, especially if you go down the route of electronic music, where obviously small differences in the selection of sounds really determine your genre, right? If you use an 808, it's this genre. If you use, I don't know, silence or something, it's a different genre. You know, that has a huge impact on the genre. But even in more classical genres like, acoustic pop or rock, or even something like hard rock metal, there's certainly the type of, although there I wouldn't really call it production, I would probably call it the arrangement, the kind of instruments that you use, right, has a really, really big impact on how it's going to be perceived, obviously. But if we're just looking at production and really taking the whole question of the instruments out of the question, yes, there are some things that are going to determine, like, if I mix a metal track, I'm going to mix it slightly differently than I'm going to mix an electronic pop track. Or if I'm mixing an electronic track, I might mix that completely different than something that is an acoustic folk song. Those two things have nothing in common almost in terms of the mixing technique. Just one example, if I'm EQing an electronic track, my EQ curves are going to look wild, because I'm really carving out the sound that I want, and I'm really aggressively shaping those sounds. Whereas with a folk song, maybe I want to retain that original performance of the artist, and I don't want to mess with it altogether. Maybe I'm not going to EQ at all. Maybe I want that realistic and slightly imperfect kind of sound, or maybe if I'm going to add some EQing, it's going to be very slight, of maybe 2 or 3 decibels here or there. So the production certainly has an impact on the production, on the genre, and the genre has a big impact on the production as well. So it's a two-way street. You can never see one without the other, I think. Beatmaster clarifies your Discord is a chat client like Slack, which I also don't know, unfortunately. I think those are they mostly for gaming or something? Because I've heard of them, but I've never looked into it. That also offers voice chat and Patreon integration. Different Patreon tiers get different roles, as an example. Oh, interesting. Maybe that's something I should look into. Let me write that down. Discord. Okay. That sounds interesting. So it's a way to chat with my patrons once I have a couple of patrons, and I can see who's higher in the ranking order, who's opted in for higher tiers. Is that the idea behind it? That might be interesting. Maybe we can do something with that. Anderson the Fourth says, I've been struggling to establish, although I should also say one thing that I find very important is I don't want to, what's the name for that? Let's just look it up real quick. We have the time, don't we? I don't want to favor. That's the word that I was looking for. I don't want to favor those that pay me more money. That's something that I was very strict with myself with in the beginning of starting my Patreon page, which is not online yet. If you're wondering, if you're just tuning in, I'm not going to favor people who pay me more money. The only favor that you're going to get is that you're going to be able to watch the feedback videos as well, or send in your songs for those. No, for example, in a live chat, I'm not going to answer your questions. I'm not gonna favor your questions just because you paid me more money per month or something like that. That's something I'm very strict about, and that's hopefully not going to happen. If it does, then it's certainly not something that I'm doing awareedly. Is that the word? Oh, Jesus, my English is failing me. Okay. All right. Okay, we have to move a little bit faster here. I think I've been taking way too much time with my questions, with my answers. All right. So Anderson the Fourth says, here we go. I've been struggling to establish my vocabulary theme. Artists like Lorde have kings and queens vibes. Ski Mask, the Slump God, uses a lot of childhood cartoons. Any tips to find your lyrical style? I think, first of all, one really great tip, I think, is just using the object writing exercise that I talk about in the 30-day lyrics challenge. In case you haven't done that one, it's just $7. It's on my website. You can find it. And that one is, I think, very helpful if you want to improve your lyrical voice as a writer. Secondly, once you've gone through that and once you've turned on the machine a little bit more, that's really what it feels like. That's what it felt like to me going through those 30 days. And I actually did that exercise a couple of times just because I really like it. It's a lot of fun, and it really feels like it's turning on your motor. It's like the jump start for your engine, kind of. But once you've gone through that, the next step is obviously really finding your voice and really thinking about what's going to be the thing that's going to set me apart. There's people who do that, who really think about that, and then there's people who just write, and whatever comes out is, what comes out. For the second case is often the people that are more successful, because it flows more natural, because it just fits their personality. And so, yes, you could think about it consciously and really make certain decisions to say, like, hey, you know what, I'm really into skydiving, so all my lyrics are going to be about skydiving equipment. That might be a great choice for you. Just because you like skydiving doesn't mean it's going to be great, though. Just because you have a passion for this other thing doesn't necessarily mean that your lyrics are going to turn out so great, because maybe other people don't share that passion, or even if they do, it still doesn't mean that skydiving is that great of a subject for lyrics, because we have come to expect certain things of lyrics. And typically we want lyrics to talk about emotions and certain dramatic scenes, or certain moments in life that are very emotionally rich. So talking about skydiving equipment maybe is not the most interesting thing to talk about, right? That just as an example, because I have some friends, for example, that are really into video games, and they would love to write songs about video games, and that might work if you're using it as a sort of comedy bit. If you're planning to write some funny songs. There was this song really long time ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I think that was it. And they had like an animation for that on YouTube. It's really, really old. That was like in the very early days of YouTube. And oh god, I'm so old. And that video was just like filled with references to cartoons and superheroes and all that kind of stuff, and Chuck Norris, and it was just really funny. And in that way it worked, but it was an emotional experience still, because it made you laugh watching it. But it's that I'm saying that just because it's very easy for a hobby that you have, something that you're really passionate about, to slip into the comedic, into the funny. And if you're not aware of that, and if you don't want that, then I'm just here to tell you, just be a little bit careful with that kind of stuff, because it can really kind of screw you over in the long run, right? So mostly what I recommend is to live a rich and fulfilling life. And that sounds like really bad advice, or like actually really great advice, but weird advice from a songwriting teacher for sure. But I think the best way as a creative person to become more creative and to write more interesting things is to lead a rich life and to experience a lot of things, and to read books about human psychology and about storytelling and those kind of things, and just read whatever you're interested in. And typically that's going to make you a more interesting person, I've found. My dad is actually a journalist, and he is also a professor at certain universities in Germany. And his students always would ask him, "What should I write about? What should I write about?" And he would always say, if you don't have anything in your life, like if you haven't ever experienced anything in life, then how are you going to write about something? You need to experience things to be able to write about them. And that's how I see it as well. You really need to keep your eyes and ears open, and maybe you have a very unique way of seeing the world, and sometimes even being, sometimes we think we have our view of the world is very boring, but sometimes even a boring view of the world can be very interesting if turned the right way, just the right way. So I think instead of looking for a specific way to write your lyrics, for looking for specific themes, oh man, I said I wasn't going to ramble, and this is such a long answer already. Instead of looking for specific themes to write about with your lyrics, I would say focus on other parts of your life. Think about what you like in general, what you like in the world, and I think that's going to influence your songwriting in a big, big way. One example I'm going to give for this before we move on to the next question is one of my favorite comedians out there, Bo Burnham, who just released a movie called 8th Grade, which was fantastic. Probably my favorite movie I've seen in a very long time. Very challenging, very interesting movie. But he also has a comedy show, which I highly recommend you check out. And in this, you can really see that his influence, like his comedy, is so heavily based on memes on the internet and YouTube videos, and it's this whole attitude. You can really see he's a teenager who in his free time, as he says in interviews as well, just loves watching memes and scrolls through his phone and is like, oh, that's funny, next one, and that's how his comedy act is as well. He's jumping from ideas, jumping from this to that, and it's so spontaneous, and it feels like he's creating the act on the spot, and that's really the magic of his act. And that's where that comes from. It has a reason. It's not there because he thought about it. So like, what can we do that wasn't done before? Oh, you know what? Let's do something where I jump around on stage like crazy and change the subject every 50 seconds. It really came from this natural way of perceiving the world, this scroll attitude of like, next one, next one, next one, right? So that, I think, is how you should approach it. Really, really watch Bo Burnham's stuff. First of all, it's hilarious and very smart as well in places, but also it really gives you an idea of how one's background, one's personal preferences can really factor in to your writing. All right? Cool. That was a very long answer, but I think a very good question. So there we go. Cool. RCCT 550 says, oh, all right. It's pronounced ARCCT and then the number. It's weird. I'm aware. Okay. Thank you. I'll look up that video. Also, thanks, Beatmaster, for the Discord explanation. And the name is... Okay, there we go. Ben the Man says, can you check your email for my question? Because YouTube won't let me post it because there are too many characters. All right. Let's do it. Sounds like a long, long question. Let's see. Ben says... Hey, I've had some issues writing lyrics. I've recently just started, and whenever I find a good beat to write lyrics on, I would usually freestyle in my head a couple of random words to flow with the beat. But then when it comes to writing it down on a piece of paper or a notepad, the flow just disappears and the lyrics that I wrote down feel slow and boring and sound nothing like my freestyle or what I had in my head. Do you by any chance have any tips for my situation or videos that might help me on this? If you do, it would be much appreciated. Thanks. Yeah, this is a really good question because that's something I struggle with as well. Like when I'm freestyling and freestyling doesn't mean like coming up with actual words, just slurring something into the microphone to an existing beat. It sounds great, and then when I start putting words to it, you know, often that beat, the flow kind of goes awry. It just kind of goes missing. Unfortunately, the answer is just a lot of work. It helps to record yourself as you're improvising to the beat. That certainly helps to have something to come back to. Whenever you're reading your lyrics and you're like, oh, this is not really flowing, it's not really working, then you come back to that initial recording and you hear your flow and you're like, oh yeah, cool, okay, that's what it needs to be. And then you come back to that. That's really the only tip I have for that. Unfortunately, otherwise it's just a lot of work. Sorry, man. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of the times that's the question. It's oftentimes just work. Kai says, if I hear one more new pop song where the artist, producer, DJ, guest vocalist, and their grandmother shout their names at the top of the track, I'm going to start screaming the Kill Bill Psycho theme. Yes, I agree. It's just, but that is marketing, man. I mean, that's smart marketing because you hear that track and your brain already tells you what that person is going to shout before he even says it. DJ Khaled. You already know that he's going to shout that thing, you know? And then you're like, oh, okay, so I guess that track is by DJ Khaled. And that's marketing, you know? It makes sense. That's why people do it. So, yeah, that's here to stay, I think. And from a marketing perspective, you got to admit it's very smart. What are your thoughts on the song element becoming more and more and more common? That's what I just said. It's mostly about marketing and making sure people remember your name so that they can buy it off of iTunes. ARCCT 550, that's what I know your name is pronounced, says, what's also nice about Discord is that it allows the community to communicate with each other regardless of you. No offense intended. Hope you understand what I'm trying to say. All right, cool. So it's a social platform that allows me to sometimes chime in and answer some questions. And all right, I'll have to look into it a little bit more. It's a good tip. Ben the Man says, thank you for the tip. You're welcome. Hello all, says Roderick Holman. Roderick, do you have a question right off the bat? Because we don't have any questions left. So if you have a question, then shoot. We have 12 more minutes, and I'm on fire, baby. Which is why I have to drink something so I don't burn. Jordan says, thank you. The long answers are very much appreciated, by the way. Glad to hear it. All right. Moreno says, how important is the lawyer in an artist's career? I see them as the artist's reflection. Well, especially in the beginning of your career, an artist can be quite important. But I think it makes sense to get a lawyer, at least here in Europe, when you start talking to other people and when it goes into contract making for whatever reason, whether that's with a sponsor or a label or a distributor or something like that, that's when you should start getting a lawyer. Before that, here in Europe, it doesn't make much sense. Although I have heard that in America, so I have a couple of friends who moved to America, and the first thing they did was they bought themselves a car, and they got a lawyer. That's what they did before they even, went out looking for houses or places to stay. So I'm not sure whether that's different in America, but yeah, there we go. Oh, there's a lot of questions coming in. Okay, guys, stop. That's way too much. I don't think we can do those in 10 minutes. Well, it's a challenge. Here we go. Let's see. Hey, I've asked the question before via email, but still, says Angie, will be heard. How simple should I make my song? I'm composing metal songs alone with the help of guitarists sometimes. But all we've got in the end of the day is the song consisted of guitar exercises and vocal runs with a little to no repeatability, except for the chorus. Right. The purpose of a rehearsal is not to write songs together, first of all, because it's very difficult to write songs together if none of you is very experienced. The best way to do it is everyone writes a little bit of stuff at home. Because otherwise what's going to happen during a rehearsal is everyone's just going to jam together and you're going to have a really fun jam and everyone has a great time, but at the end of the day, you have produced nothing. And that's how it is with my bands as well. Like, I don't have a band right now, but when I used to have bands, we would write songs at home, but when we would get there, everyone just when they start unpacking their instruments, everyone just starts kind of jamming and everyone's just playing funk music or folk or whatever. And it's just something completely different comes out, even if it was a metal band or something, So that really is not conductive to great rehearsals. It really isn't. So that just really doesn't work, I found, in my experience. I just put out a video called the co-writing rules or something like that. What did I call it? I forgot. But it's very recent, like from 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think 2 weeks ago. Do check that video out. That's where I explain how I think co-writing actually works. It's more of someone writes almost an entire song, and then you bounce it back and forth until you have something that both of you are really happy with. And because when you're sitting by yourself, you can really focus on one melody. And so improvising rarely leads to good songs. I never improvise when I write songs. It's about I'm singing melodies, very well aware that has to be my melody. I'm not just when I for example, I can't write melodies on guitar because every time I get out my guitar trying to come up with a melody, I'm just gonna start playing some blues riffs, and that's really not great songwriting. It's really not good melody writing. So I keep my guitar out of it. I use it for coming up with chords and not much else. I really have to sing everything because singing everything naturally gives everything a certain breath. Because, surprise, we all have to breathe, and a certain, it just makes sense because we start using words, and then everything, words kind of give your melodies a little bit of a structure. So that's what I would highly recommend is start with some chords, so first of all, start writing at home, not together, until you're ready, until you have something that you can start working on. Start with a song at home. Start with drums and bass and harmony and stuff like that. First of all, have a little bit of a backbone, and then start singing to it. So there we go. Hopefully that answers your question, Angie. Ben says, how can I improve my lyricism? Again, I would shoot you back to the 30-day lyrics challenge, which is on my website. Again, it's called the 30-day lyrics challenge. It's just $7, and that is I think the best way to do it, the quickest, and it's just a great way to, over the course of a month, to improve your lyric writing. Obviously, I have a bigger course as well called the Lyric Writing Master Files. So if you really want to get into the heavy theory on that subject, you can also check that one out. But I think the quickest fix is certainly the 30-day lyrics writing challenge, or the 30-day lyric challenge. Nizar Al-Zain says, can you give some tips on writing music for podcasts or YouTube shows? Oh, man, those are some great questions, and you come up with those in the last couple of minutes? That is such a shame. All right. All right. First of all, I hear a lot of terrible music in podcasts. Not so much on YouTube because a lot of people just use the royalty-free stuff from these. What's this guy's name? There's this one big composer that writes all the royalty-free music. I forgot what his name was. Anyways, I think the trick is to, first of all, if it's a bumper, so if it's something where you have an intro or something like that, then please keep it short. That's my most important one. There's so many channels out there where I have to sit through sometimes 45 seconds of intros before I can get to the actual video. That's crazy. And I'm not kidding about this. Some of them are as long as 45 seconds. So my intros are typically 10 seconds maximum. I want to get through it as quickly as possible. And it's just going to say the title of the show, and then here we go, back into the whole thing, right? So that's a big one. Be very quick. That means you don't have a lot of stuff to write. You don't really, it's not really about composition, it's about sound design. So approach it from a sound design perspective, a producer's perspective, more than from a composer's perspective. Don't even try to write some interesting chords or interesting melodies. Although for my last intro that I did for Pulling the Lever, which you can check out, which just released, I think, the last Saturday, 3 days ago. I used some interesting chords as well because I wanted to create an interesting kind of floaty, dreamy kind of vibe. But in general, it's going to be one chord and one quick melody, and that's it. For background music, this doesn't go so much for podcasts because there you generally don't want background music, because those you want to be able to be heard in cars, and there everything that distracts, so you don't want that. For YouTube music, I'm not the authority on that subject, but I think in general, like beats and groovy hip-hop stuff works the best, I've found. If you want to go very dramatic, you can go orchestral, although personally I really never like that. I think it feels like you're overbloating your content, and if the music is too dramatic for what you're actually saying, it can really kind of destroy your video. So I like the cool, relaxed kind of hip-hop grooves the best, I think. Or if you're going for something funny, I think a really great channel that handles music very well is PS Access. It's a channel about PlayStation, the PlayStation 4. And their music is just fantastic. I think the way they place music in their videos is one of the best. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say for that, because we really don't have much more time. But it's a really great question, and feel free to come back with this question in a future Q&A. Okay, how simple? Oh, that's the one we already had. Thomas says, I've noticed pop choruses being lower in pitch lately, like in chest voice. What do you think about this? Eastside Benny Blanco. Yeah, certainly true, and that is mostly because implied tension is really taking over pop music more and more. It's something I wrote about in my book, The Addiction Formula, if you're interested in that kind of subject. But the idea behind it is by giving you less sometimes, that creates a certain tension that is very palpable, and that can keep you interested in the track, because you're like, this is something I'm going to talk about in a future video. I think it's a very interesting subject. So keep your eyes out for a video called... Oh, Jesus, something with, well, it goes into implied tension at the end of it. Oh, yeah, I already released that video. It's the skill one. That's the last video I just released on Saturday. It's that same reason. It's the two-legged thing that you have to push up against in order to make it stand. Can you do an artist series on Maroon 5? They're like one of my biggest influences. I really love Maroon 5. I heard their music for years and always asked people, what's the song I really like? And they're like, oh, that's Maroon 5. I'm like, oh, really? Cool. I should check them out someday. And then I did, just bought all of their albums, and a couple of years ago. Really like their stuff. And they're certainly an interesting band to analyze. They're certainly very formulaic in their writing. There's a lot to pin down to a certain formula. But it's still very, very great, really great band, and they understand groove and melody like almost no other band out there, in my personal opinion. White says, okay, maybe another question. How do I write a groove? I have very bad ears for bass lines, for example. There's a course for that as well that I have on my website, so I'm just going to give the quick answer. Go to my website and search for Drum Writing for Non-Drummers, or sometimes also called the Drum Writing Master Files, where I really break down how to write grooves. I think this is going to be the perfect course for you. If you know a little bit how to produce music, I think it's going to be exactly the right course for you. Thomas says, how do you write melismatic hooks? Let me check out that word, because I don't know this word. Melismatic. Oh, melismatisch. Great. What does that mean? I'm a little dumb. You should know that. Okay. Let's see what it says. All right. Melisma. So it's a melody that's being sung on one syllable. It's the singing of a single syllable of text while moving between several different notes in succession. Oh, gotcha. So it's like today, something like that, right? Instead of singing day we gonna go, something like that, you prolong the word over several notes. Well, I think for that kind of approach, and I know what you mean, I know where the question comes from. For this kind of approach, typically you want to, it's a lyrics first kind of thing oftentimes, where when you have written lyrics before you start writing the melody, typically you will have to think more about like, okay, so we need this kind of rhythm, so maybe I have to stretch this word a little bit more. And so the word day has to has to take the place of 5 syllables. And so just so that the structure of the different lines matches up. And so that's typically where that comes from. And it's often a clear sign that someone wrote the lyrics first instead of the melody first when you hear those melismatic lines. So thanks for that word. I didn't know it before. Very good to know. Moreno says, oh yeah, can you speak a little more on the video on the record industry does not require skill? Yes, maybe I'm going to make another video about that someday. But is there something in particular that you wanted to know about? Angel will be heard. Yes, you will be. Says, thank you for the answer. That's what I figured out by myself. Actually, the song got to be almost done when I asked my bandmate to help. Yes, definitely. Thomas says, I'll ask my cues next week if you don't get around to them. Welcome back, by the way. Thank you very much. Thanks for getting to my cues. Absolutely. Beatmaster says, knowing that you're dumb is actually quite smart. That depends. Yeah, and the opposite also goes, that if you say you're very smart a lot, then that is typically a very dumb thing to say. I'm not going to say who that was, but we all know who we're talking about. Thomas Wolf says, yes. Marilyn's mother says, isn't that singing a long scale melismatic? Is it? I don't know. Anyways, folks, we're done here. I rushed through those last couple ones, and we're only 30 seconds over time. So thanks very much for watching. Next time, this might be gated material, so I'm not sure yet if I can do it this week, but pretty sure next week the first Q&A is going to be patrons only. Man, I still have problems with that word because it's Patreon, but patrons. Jesus, I have to really have to get used to that because I'll be saying a lot more. Folks, sometime during the week, I'm going to make a YouTube video about that with the new Patreon channel, and yeah, you'll know where to find me, and hopefully I'll see all of you back next week. And take care. Cheers and stay